I am honored to welcome you all to Plenary Session 3. I am Aishwarya Narendra, Analyst Research at ICDRI. We have a distinguished panel of experts here today, ready to share their valuable insights on infrastructure labels, an opportunity to unlock infrastructure resilience investments in LMICs. To start the session, please join me in welcoming our esteemed speakers on the stage. Our first speaker is Ms. Marie Lamfrendo. She is a Chief Strategy Officer at Meridian. She will be joining us virtually today. Ms. Marie has 22 years of experience as crossroad of infrastructure, investment, and advisory and policy across both public and private sector, with a strong track record in the energy and renewable sectors, particularly in emerging markets. She has been a lifelong advocate of quality infrastructure, especially in context of G20 as the CEO Global Infrastructure Hub. She holds an MSc in Engineering, Strategy and Leadership. She is a Global Leadership Fellow of World Economic Forum. I welcome her in the session for discussion. Our second speaker is Ms. Neha Kumar. She is the head of South Asia Program, Climate Bond Initiative. She has nearly 2 decades of experience in responsible financing, environmental and political risks, and has served as national and international ESG and sustainable finance standard setting bodies. She drives policy, strategy, and partner programs to scale up the green bonds and sustainable financial ecosystems. Green Bonds Institute is currently preparing a resilience taxonomy. She is trained in science, international environment negotiation, and politics, and has an MPhil from JNU University, New Delhi, India. She is also a senior research associate with the ODI. I invite Ms. Neha on stage. Our third speaker today is Mr. Juan Garin. He is also joining virtually. He is a policy advisor in public governance directorate at OECD, where he has led the development of the Blue Dot Network, a global certification framework for quality infrastructure projects. Since joining the OECD in 2014, he has coordinated a major horizontal project on sustainable infrastructure, contributed to the work of the G20 Infrastructure Working Group, and advised numerous countries on infrastructure governance and planning and financing policies, frameworks and practices. Mrs. Garin holds a bachelor's degree in engineering from the University of Montreal and MBA from Business School of University of Oxford. I welcome him to join the conversation online. Our fourth speaker is Mr. Roger Cruz. He is the marketing manager for Fast Infra label at Global Infrastructure Basel. Mr. Roger has more than 17 years of experience in world-leading companies, both in financial data and construction value chain sectors. At the GIB, he is responsible for creating and executing the label uptake strategy, connecting infrastructure financiers and developers willing to increase the positive impact of sustainability performance on their assets. I invite you for the discussion. Our fifth speaker is Mr. Sutanu Patri. He will also be joining us virtually. He is a lead consultant in Mumbai Electrical Bus Fleet Project Preparation, which is also a pilot project for Fast Infra label. Mr. Sutanu has diverse experience of over 27 years in project and corporate finance, procurements and project management, lending, investing, fundraising, risk assessment in various infrastructure sectors. His sector experience is focused on low-carbon public transportation, including commuter and metro rail, city bus, IPT, IMT, electric vehicles, renewable energy. I welcome him in the session for discussion. And our final speaker is Mr. Palash Srivastav. He is CEO of IICL Projects. He possesses 3 decades of experience in infrastructure transaction, advisory, investment, debt, equity and funds, public-private partnership, in infrastructure, management, consulting and fundraising, capacity building and training in India. He has led teams through a variety of leadership roles, managing contracts and concessions for leading financial organizations. I welcome you, sir, on stage. And the session will be moderated by Ms. Agathe Nogaret. She is an international technical expert in infrastructure climate change adaptation with the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure in New Delhi on secondment from the French government. She supports the international expansion of CDRI Secretariat activities, especially through the Infrastructure Resilient Island State Program. I welcome Abhay. Please join us on stage. Yeah, so now to mark the successful beginning of Plenary Session 3, I would like to hand over the microphone to you. Thank you, Abhay.
Thank you very much, Aishwarya. Dear guests and colleagues, you all know by now that the 2024 theme for our International Conference for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure is Investing Today for a More Resilient Tomorrow. Of course, since its creation, CDRI has been advocating relentlessly for increased investment into disaster-resilient infrastructure. But what is disaster-resilient infrastructure exactly? So, of course, one can argue that it's what's left standing after a disaster, but this is not very useful for an investor as a definition. So we have been engaged in different initiatives that look at defining very precisely what disaster-resilient infrastructure is to support infrastructure investment in the right projects. At CDRI, we wish to build on existing efforts to define quality infrastructure in general, such as the quality infrastructure investment principles defined in the context of G20 in 2019 under the leadership of Government of Japan, as well as a more recent Pacific Quality Infrastructure set of principles adopted in 2023 by Pacific countries under the leadership of our member Australia. So resilience is at the heart of these principles. They look at quality infrastructure, but they also have this resilience dimension. However, these principles are voluntary, and so together with our guests online, we are looking at initiatives that look at establishing certifications or labels that will help provide confidence to investors, confidence to invest in durable projects, in resilient projects. Also, the confidence to invest in new markets, potentially riskier markets like the ones in lower and middle-income countries. CDRI participates in these initiatives with the objective to direct large and privately managed funds to disaster-resilient infrastructure projects where they are needed the most. Of course, lower and middle-income countries, but also small island developing states, a geography in which CDRI is particularly interested in. There are trillions needed to bridge the infrastructure gap, and we wish to make sure that any investment that goes into bridging this gap is made within a spirit of resilience. So our guests today will detail how their initiatives can promote investment in disaster-resilient infrastructure and climate change adaptation. They will also, I hope, explain the relevance of their initiatives to lower-income countries, middle-income countries, and small island developing states. And hopefully they will detail some of the implementation challenges that they are facing and give CDRI some pointers on how we can help together solve these challenges to guarantee the uptake of these certifications and labels in a maximum number of countries. Ultimately, we want to increase the resilience of the most vulnerable inhabitants of this planet. I will now hand over the floor to Marie Lamfrendo, the Chief Strategy Officer of Meridiam, for her keynote address. Thank you. Over to you, Marie.
Merci beaucoup, Agathe. Thank you very much, and good afternoon to all of you. Maybe a quick word of introduction about Meridiam so you understand what type of investor we are. So Meridiam is an equity investor in infrastructure projects that has been investing in the last almost 20 years, roughly 20 billion across developed and developing economies. So we are one of those very few equity investors based in the Western Hemisphere that do have really this expertise in terms of really delivering infrastructure in emerging economies. So that really comes to the point about why we as investors are looking at resilience. I think the first reason is that it matters for the private sector, first, because it is good business. And in there is a couple of components to that. First is risk mitigation. So resilient infrastructure projects, they are designed to withstand and recover from the various shocks and stresses, natural disaster, climate change impact, economic downturns. So by labeling projects as resilient, investors like us, we really see the potential to mitigate potential risk associated with these factors and ultimately protecting this investment on the long run. Because it's important to understand that many investors like us, we're not only investors, but we're also asset managers, right? Meridiam, for example, has 127 assets in total in both developed and developing economies. So resilience is something very important on the risk side. The second thing, why it's important for us, it's the long-term value. So resilient infrastructure tends to have a longer lifespan. As I mentioned, we are an asset manager too, provide more consistent returns over time than non-resilient infrastructure. So by promoting and investing in resilient projects, investors can ensure the long-term value and the sustainability of our portfolio. It's also increasingly important because it creates a market differentiation. So participating in a labeling initiative for resilient infrastructure projects can differentiate an investor in the market. And I think it's important for all of the investors to realize that if some of them haven't realized it yet. So it really signals a commitment to sustainability, risk management, long-term value creation, which in turn could attract third-party money, like because the people like us that are general partner, we manage third-party money from what we call limited partner for pension fund, sovereign wealth fund. So I think increasingly it's important that as an investor, we aggregate all of that money, that we show that signal. It's also important increasingly for regulatory compliance. So in some jurisdiction, regulations or incentives may favor investment in resilient infrastructure. We see this a lot coming up in developed economies, but I think ultimately the bylaws of the different funds that we have under Meridiam, but also many of the other investors, will rely on those compliance that are often addicted by developed economies under which we are regulated. For example, Meridiam is regulated by the authority of the financial market in France. So very important that this starts also in developed economies. So we're ensuring that we're bringing those best practices to emerging economies as bylaws of our funds. And so ultimately, as I said, it's good for the business. So that's why investors are gradually entering into that, like Meridiam and others. But it's also because increasingly business is keen to do good, right? I think it's important to realize that, for example, Meridiam was the first B Corp in France, but also has been very much pioneering in sustainability overall. But many more now investors see increasing pressure from their stakeholders, shareholders, clients, public to consider environmental, social, and governance factors in their investment decision. So supporting really resilient infrastructure that align with his expectations and enhance the investor's reputation and also its credibility. Also, we see much more impact investing. So what used to be infrastructure as an investment, very streamlined into very regular asset, roads and bridges, are increasingly getting into impact investing and ensuring that through investment that you're doing in infrastructure, you could get positive social and environmental outcome alongside financial returns. So labeling resilient infrastructure projects allow investors to directly contribute to building more sustainable and resilient community, aligning with our increasingly impact investing objectives. So now let me briefly mention, why do we need a label? And here I'm going to mention Fast Infra. I think my colleagues from GIB will explain more. I think it's quite important to understand that Meridiam actually is, through its CEO, Thierry Deo, is the chairman of the Fast Infra Group. And many more actually investors have informed the Fast Infra label. And why we felt it was actually really necessary. It is because we need more of a common definition of climate resilience among public and private players. And as you've heard, there is a lot of pressure from various places, including from ourselves. We want to do more. But the big problem is, what are we actually doing? And what does mean resilience for the sovereign wealth fund in a Nordic country to pension fund in Northern America? And what does it mean for us as an investor regulated under the French authority. So I think it's important that increasingly there is that common definition. So we're not spending too much time trying to understand what it means, which risk in the end that nothing will get done because it gets too long to find that kind of alignment. So that's why having those common definition is really particularly important. We see also that at the back of those those standards, you could create tools that could also start helping informing practically what it means when you assess the projects at the due diligence stage. So that common definition that you do at the beginning will have a trickle-down effect in all of the different steps of the process of investing into a resilient project. But you need to start with that to ensure you can get to that conclusion successfully and in a timely manner. Investors, they don't have massive teams in the background, similarly to the public sector side, right? We're not numerous in being able to kind of do that exercise. So I'm just to give you then an example about what we do at Meridiam. As part of my remit as a Chief Strategy Officer and Executive Committee member of Meridiam, I'm overseeing a urban resilient fund. It's quite innovative because it's actually targeting sponsoring and financing projects on the equity side that are resilient in municipal area, which add a level of complexity because you're entering the sub-sovereign level, which usually makes projects a little bit more complicated to finance and provide line of guarantee for. So that particular fund is supposed to really work on that resilient elements. But what does it mean for resilience? And because we don't have a common standard for resilience, we basically created a resilience committee, putting all of our limited partner within that fund, talking to one another and kind of agreeing about that scorecard and saying, okay, this is what it means. This is the joint definition that we find for each other. But can you imagine how much faster and how many more funds could be created if you would have that common definition? So hopefully that kind of bring that practicality elements to the debate. It's not only, and I know that for many people it means, well, what a definition will change. Well, these are the practical impacts that it could have. And then ultimately, let me use here my previous hat. As you've heard from the person who introduced us, I used to be the CEO of a G20 Global Infrastructure Hub. It was the infrastructure entity of the G20. And we spent alongside with the World Bank and the OECD many years in advocating for various needs in terms of creating labels for sustainability, and quality infrastructure is one of them that came from the Japanese ear, but also about resilience. And I think really now resilience is one of the pillars of quality infrastructure. And it's really important now to define this even more closely, especially in the context of climate change. And given there is a lot of infrastructure. So labels now, if I'm thinking at the impact it would have really beyond what we think is private sector that needs to happen. On all the financing tranches. And here I'm thinking, there are regulations that for the time being basically impose limitation to banks to lend more onto infrastructure. But how about we will actually move those regulatory incentives to allow them to provide better conditions in terms of financing for sustainable and resilient infrastructure. And having that common definition will be the basis to define those incentives into those regulations. So another aspect about how those definitions and those labels could help to make things faster. And to finish off, ultimately, it's important to also realize that when you get into sustainability or resilience, there is a lot of work that needs to be done within government in raising awareness about what it is. And ultimately, resilience is a local issue. At least that's what we see on the private sector side and also on the public sector side. The OECD has done a very good report on that recently for the G20 that really couple the resiliency aspect with the local aspect. And I think ultimately you see a lot of it benefit at that level. So it's important to have that definition to be able to boost the capabilities in public stakeholder and the public counterparts at the sovereign and at the CT level to really ensure that resilience is better understood, it's better prioritized, because ultimately The private sector will come in at some point under certain condition, but ultimately resilience should be part of the vision that the governments themselves, but also the municipality, are first and foremost putting together to ensure the benefits for their communities. So I will let you on that word, and thank you again very much to CDRI for the invitation to speak to all of you, and wish I could have joined you in person, and I'm sure I will be able next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marie. And we really appreciate the good news that infrastructure resilience is not only good for the planet and its people, but also it's good business, and that there is demand among investors. I want to thank you very much, and I know that you have somewhere to be very fast, so I actually let you go. Many, many thanks, and we really hope to have you in person next time. Goodbye, Marie, and thank you.
Thank you.
So now I'm going to turn to our next speaker, which is Neha Kumar. So now we have heard from Marie from the investor standpoint that we need a definition of what resilient investment is. Where do we put the money? We need to have some frameworks. So at the Green Bonds Initiative, you are doing a lot of work to define what these virtuous investments are. And so far you've worked on mitigation, but you have this ongoing initiative to create an climate change adaptation taxonomy. So we would really like to hear from this experience from you and how that can change the game in investment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you to you for posing that question, and thank you to CDRI for the opportunity to come together in a diverse but very targeted panel to talk about these things in a little bit of detail. So just before I set out to make a couple of my remarks, I would also like to tell you all what Climate Bonds Initiative, it's Green Bonds, Climate Bonds Initiative is the name, the actual name, what it does. So Climate Bonds Initiative is an international organization which is investor focused, and it is working on shifting capital at scale and looking at really the bond markets, the kind of opportunity that lies over there to be able to shift huge amounts of capital to where they're required in terms of climate solutions. So our very reason of being is that more finance flows to where it is needed. And in 2013, we started the process of developing definitions, but also making them granular to create standards. And the initial spur of the market was, of course, mitigation. And you would see that, the green bonds, and if you talk about, because I just wanted to talk about the state of play and then come to the role that taxonomy is playing and how the resilience taxonomy also needs to be conceptualized slightly differently than what mitigation is. Mitigation can be very binary when it comes to green, and resilience has a lot more layers in it, and we so I will explicate on that in just a moment. But the state of play, right? I mean, we just heard from an investor that they're interested, and yet we know that the finance doesn't flow to adaptation projects. There is a huge amount of finance gap. I think UNEP in its last report just said it came out in 2023 that the flows that are required on adaptation are 15 to 18 times higher than earlier estimated. And in the year 2021, the money that was flowing to adaptation finance reduced by 15%. So there is a real challenge. And that challenge, one of the extremely important tools to mitigate that challenge is to be able to identify what those projects are and how credible is that project. When you say it is resilience measure, first of all, you should know what a resilience measure is, how you're defining it as, and whether it is credible or not. Because, we heard there that private sector investors are interested, but the moment you talk to investors, they also are interested in a deal being credible. And that's where the definitional role really plays a big part. So if you look at the thematic finance, which is grown, it's about $4.2 trillion worth globally, right? This is the green, sustainability-linked bonds. And if you look at resilience focused, bonds and loans, then we see that only 16% of these deals have some kind of aspect of resilience that is integrated into these deals, okay? So, and most of it is happening still in the developed economies, not coming to emerging economies. Also, the institutions which are raising this kind of money, private sector is showing interest but isn't picking up yet. It is the governments, it is the development finance institutions, it is the supranationals that are really raising money against it, for it. Now, coming quickly over to the efforts that we are putting into developing the taxonomy. In 2020, we had come out with what we call the climate resilience principles. And the fundamental aspect of that was that these were broad principles, but both at the level of activity and asset, you had to identify a resilience activity, but it also had to be in relation to the system within which the asset or an activity was placed. Because you had to look into that there are no adverse effects of that adaptation oriented asset level investment. But these were broad principles. It is extremely important, that these broad principles are then further, there is further criteria which is developed. There is more granularity, because if you have to guide the flow, you have to also see that, the purpose for which the funds are intended to be spent actually goes. So there is a greenwashing aspect to it, and that is why standards are important. Now, what are we doing when we look at resilience taxonomy? We released a paper last year that was in collaboration with UNDRR, and we just wanted to put out a conceptual framework on how these resilience taxonomy could be developed. And what we found was, and more as not what we found in the hindsight, but also by design, that we did not want to create something new, because there are standards. There is FAST label. There are many other standards. So we really wanted to see what are those things which are already been defined. And we heard in the morning today that any investment for resilience will have to be backed by some kind of climate risk assessment. Now, climate risk assessment itself is a huge exercise. It is an expensive exercise, and it has to be done because, it has to be based within science and, on certain criteria. But why not bring out with a tool, with a framework in the market where you can actually take it further slightly and make it even easier to use? So what we conceptualized was that when we studied that you could actually look at the framework in 3 categories. You could make a whitelist, which is that, certain investments get a pass-through because there is very clear case for that, for them to be enabling, say, an early warning system. It leads to, resilience strengthening, etc. So it comes in the whitelist. But there could be certain other projects which would require some minor checks. So those we put as, in some minor checks or standardized checks category. And I will also give you some examples. And then there would be certain investments which will have to be thoroughly checked for what they are actually doing. And when I say that what they're actually doing, we also adapted the concept of substantial contribution from the EU taxonomy. And I think it's a wonderful concept to be actually applied to not only to adaptation measures, but also to mitigation, etc. That it is, you can only have an incremental approach, but you can also really put in certain measures and decide it within the context that you are putting that measure in, how much from the baseline, that you have to start measuring so that the contribution that it makes, it is substantial. The other thing that we introduced as a check was that when you are doing a substantial contribution check, you should also check that it is not leading to maladaptation, or it is not leading to a significant harm in other kind of objectives on mitigation, etc. I will conclude by, and in this saying that what we have done is we are looking at it a system wide approach, because we know that resilience is interlinked. So we are looking at 7 thematic areas, which includes resilience health system, resilience infrastructure, resilience societies, resilience cities, etc. So while there are infrastructure categories and sectors, for example, there is transport as infrastructure sector, there is water infrastructure, but in even resilience health systems, you would have certain infrastructure sub-themes or sub-categories. And the group that we have been able to put together, which is called the Resilience Technical Advisory Group, the job of that group is to really put those interconnections in place and really come down to very specific criteria, bringing together what already exists, and then following a very science and evidence-based approach to look at what will count as a very specific measure for a particular infrastructure project. So I could give you examples perhaps in the second round. If you want right now, I can do that also.
Yeah, thanks very much, Neha. And definitely the credibility of the Climate Bonds Initiative, as well as the credibility of all the participants which are participating into this resilience taxonomy definition, are going to be, I think, a very important component of the credibility of the taxonomy itself. But then, is credibility enough? We are here to make sure that these tools help getting investment into resilience and climate change adaptation in this case. So can you help us understand, once you release this classification, this taxonomy of investments, how it can be used to encourage investment in this field?
Yeah. So thank you for that question, because of course it has to be used to be able to guide investment flows. So if you look at the interest from the investor side is pretty clear, but you have to look at it, who could be those potential actors, because right now actually the awareness levels also within both people who want that capital and those who are giving that capital, that there is a mismatch in terms of the language that exists in terms of definition. So once that is there, I think there is initial sort of deals that you would require as demonstration deals. And from what our experience shows is, and we did that in agriculture sector, infrastructure is still, developing, that once there is a demonstration deal around, these criteria, then market learns from what market sees, right? But what will be important in this is that when a label, so self-labeling will not be that effective, I feel that there needs to be third-party verification, etc. There are different kinds of issuer types. Palash will definitely talk about from his point of view. We have been waiting for a green issuance to come from them as well. But say, for example, sovereigns. So governments are raising sovereign green bonds. In fact, in the Indian sovereign green bond, adaptation and resilience is also there. Because they can actually then lend it to other states. Then in India, for example, the provinces, the states, a lot of capital investment in infrastructure is going to be done by states. And so they are also, and they keep on asking, and we just heard about municipalities, most of the work has resilient component in that. So when we are really looking at the kind of entities that can actually tap this market, because the market is huge. In India, just giving you some figures over here, nearly 41.6 billion of green bonds have been issued. Okay. Now, each green bond also has some adaptation and resilience feature, but it is mainly mitigation focused. Okay. So the idea is that can you actually have a large part of that instrument focus on resilience. And I would definitely see then large infrastructure projects which can happen through governments and at the level of states, at the level of cities, would be definitely be the opportunity windows where this would happen. And we have seen that when there is certification, third-party verification, we talked about regulation, there is a very strong focus on regulatory aspect as well. So I think it is in the nascent stage, but with these tools coming in the market, we will see, with some effort, with some regulatory support, I think the pickup will be quite high.
Thanks very much, and we'll definitely talk more about third-party verification with our next few speakers. Thanks very much, and we're really looking forward to seeing this resilience taxonomy coming out probably next year. So thanks. So our next speaker now is actually online. This is Juan Garin, who is a policy advisor in sustainable finance and infrastructure at OECD, which hosts the secretariat of the Blue Dot Network. So Juan, we are very happy to have you online. So we are very much looking forward to hearing more about the Blue Dot Network, especially the initiative that you have to create a certification scheme within the Blue Dot Network. So over to you, Juan.
Great, thank you very much, Agathe, and thank you to CDRI for the invitation to speak on this very important topic. So there were a few slides that I shared, but while waiting for them, so
they are up.
Yeah, thank you. If we could go to the next slide. So what is the Blue Dot Network? Well, it's a global certification for quality infrastructure investments. It is open to infrastructure projects across all major sectors. So you can think of energy, transport, water, ICT. And it's also open to projects anywhere in the world. So it's not focused on any particular region. Projects in both developed and developing economies can participate. It is being developed by a group of countries, which include the US, Japan, Australia, Spain, the United Kingdom, Switzerland, and now Turkey. And these countries see this as a mechanism to promote investment into infrastructure. The OECD, which is an international organization, as you know, has been supporting the development of the certification. And as Agathe mentioned, just earlier this month, it was officially announced that the OECD will host the secretariat that will essentially oversee the global rollout of the certification in the coming months. Now, we believe that this certification will provide a trusted signal to investors and other stakeholders that a project is environmentally and socially sustainable, resilient, inclusive, transparent, and economically efficient. Now, how does it create this trusted signal? In our view, there are three pillars to creating trust. If we could go to the next slide, please. The first is grounding it in a foundation of international standards. And this is important because international standards reflect a widespread consensus around what constitutes best practice. So they benefit from pretty broad legitimacy. The second is ensuring that it is evidence-based. It isn't sufficient to make claims. It's important that those claims be supported by empirical evidence. And the third pillar is independent verification. So it's important that these claims and evidence are then verified by third-party experts. And we see this as really critical for the credibility of the scheme. Next slide, please. So what is a Blue Dot Network certified project? Essentially, a certified project is a project that has, first of all, self-assessed against essential requirements that have been derived from commonly applied international standards. It's important to mention that we are not creating a new standard here. What we are doing is essentially consolidating and synthesizing existing standards that are commonly applied, that are relevant for infrastructure. The second step is then having that that self-assessment verified by an independent third-party certification body. And then finally, it is monitored over the life cycle of the project to ensure that, a project continues to meet the commitments and requirements throughout its life. The scope of the certification is set by what we call these 10 Blue Dot Network elements, which essentially cover what are familiar environmental, social, and governance criteria, but then go beyond and address some dimensions, other dimensions that are important for infrastructure, such as transparent procurement, value for money, anti-corruption. One of the central elements is element number 4, which is about building resilience against climate and disaster risks. And that really looks to embed resilience across the life cycle of a project. The next slide, please. Now, what are the benefits of a certification? I think our previous speakers really helped to address this point, but we really see benefits as the certification is benefiting a wide range of stakeholders. Now, beginning with investors, which are clearly an important target in view of the objective of helping to catalyze investment. So we think a certification will help to send a message that a project is aligned with international standards and that it has identified and addressed a number of key risks. And in doing so, it will help to reduce some of the barriers to infrastructure investment. Fundamentally, if a project is certified, irrespective of its location, if a project could be located in Brazil or in Nigeria or in Vietnam or even somewhere in Europe, a certified project represents a consistent level of quality. So it shouldn't matter so much as to where the project is located. And an investor should look at a project from the perspective of this project has been certified and they can be confident that it's a quality project. Of course, it's also looking to bring benefits to other stakeholders, such as governments, by helping them to attract investment into their infrastructure, and also to ensure that those investments generate value for money. From the point of view of communities as well, a certified project is a project that creates local jobs and that supports economic development. Next slide, please. What was very important for the OECD and also for the members was to ensure that from the very start, this was an initiative that brought in the views of the private sector and civil society. So it's really been developed with and for the private sector. To get this input, we have something called an executive consultation group, which is a multi-stakeholder community composed of over 200 leaders from business, civil society, and international organizations. And CDRI has been a member from the early days and has been really, we're very grateful for the input that CDRI has provided in terms of the development of the initiative. Now, this group has really been key to making sure that what we develop is both credible and efficient. So it's important that it's something that's trusted, but at the same time doesn't represent too much of a burden for project developers. Next slide, please. Now, we have a number of prominent global investors that are part of the executive consultation group, and they have really been instrumental in helping shape the approach to make sure that the certification increases confidence. And it does so by embedding quality standards and ESG criteria in infrastructure development from the very start. Next slide, please. Now, before launching the certification, it was crucial to make sure that, to road test it, to make sure that it was fit for purpose across different sectors, but also, in different parts of the world and at different stages of the life cycle. So we piloted the certification on 8 projects. These are all projects that were put forward by members of our consultation group. So they were put forward by investors, by project developers, and infrastructure operators. One of the projects I think is particularly relevant for this conference. It's a subsea cable in a small island state in the Pacific called the Republic of Palau. And one of the main rationales and objectives of that investment was to create resilience in terms of its connectivity. So this cable was going to sort of double the overall capacity, in terms of connectivity for that island to make sure that, it wasn't dependent on one single, connection point. So we use the results of this piloting process to fine tune and calibrate the framework before its official release. Next slide, please. So how can organizations engage with the Blue Dot Network? There are essentially three routes. One is to join the network. So governments can either join as governing members or network members. And it's open to countries, it's not just open to OECD countries, it's open to really any country that's committed to quality infrastructure investment. A second channel is to join the executive consultation group, so businesses that are welcome to join. And again, this is a very diverse group, which includes, companies from across the whole infrastructure ecosystem. And finally, is to propose projects for certification. We have started accepting proposals as we're initiating the certification process in the next weeks and months. So we welcome, projects that might be interested in applying. You can contact myself or Edwin Lau for any questions, and we have a website, which is shown here. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks very much, Juan. Really appreciate this exhaustive presentation. Even though it was brief, I appreciate your respect for our timeline. You mentioned this example of Palau, and of course, as you know, in CDRI, we have a very keen interest in supporting small island developing states, as well as other countries that could be more resource constrained. And so, of course, an initiative coming from the OECD, which is basically a club of high-income countries, is always for us raising the question, is this going to be really applicable in lower-income countries, in middle-income countries, in SIDS? So based on the piloting examples, can you tell us more about the kind of challenges that we may run into and what kind of support would be needed to roll out such a labeling initiative?
That's a great question. So let me just first start by saying that this was really developed with a view to helping low and middle income countries to raise and attract financing for infrastructure investment. So I mean that's a core objective. And that's why, so when we developed it in our executive consultation group, we ensured that there was representation from these countries. So it's very diverse representations. We have, companies and organizations based in, across all parts of the world, so Latin America, Africa, and Asia. So in terms of how it was developed, it wasn't just developed by OECD based organizations. Secondly, in terms of the country membership, even though current membership is essentially high-income countries, since we have established the secretary that is independent, the membership can be different, and it can be a broader membership than the OECD. So in the next sort of months will involve broadening the membership to include a more diverse membership. Now, in terms of the development of the framework, we also made sure that it was developed on the basis of universal standards or international standards that have universal applications, not just standards that are EU standards or OECD standards. So here I'm referring to standards like the IFC performance standards, UN guiding principles on business and human rights, or the ILO conventions. You mentioned the piloting, and of course, this is a crucial step to make sure that what we develop is going to be accessible for projects in low and middle income countries. So we had, pilots in Africa and Latin America, and in Asia, and in the Pacific. And this really was also to make sure that the process of applying for certification doesn't represent an excessive burden. Nevertheless, there are going to be, situations where it could be a challenge for a project developer or a, contracting authority to meet the requirements. And so this is why the Blue Dot Network is putting in place capacity building tools and training. So this will, be something that will be available to assist governments and project developers in terms of in preparing projects that can, meet the Blue Dot Network requirements. An example is something we've been developing at the OECD called the Infrastructure Anti-Corruption Toolbox, which is a set of tools, including, guidebooks and trainings that will help projects to meet the anti-corruption requirements in the Blue Dot Network.
Yeah, thanks very much, Juan, and we're really looking forward to rolling out this initiative with you. We are very interested in seeing a lot of Blue Dot certified projects that attract investments. Thank you very much. And our next speaker is Roger Cruz. So Roger is a marketing manager with Global Infrastructure Basel, which is supporting the Fast Infra Group in creating a similar complementary labeling initiative, which is called the Fast Infra Label. So Juan, what we are, sorry, Roger, what we are interested in is to understand how your initiative works, how it reflects on resilience as well, how it's applicable in lower and middle income countries, and how we can work together. So over to you, Roger.
Wow, fantastic. First of all, good afternoon. Thanks for the invitation. It's great to speak to such a qualified audience and qualified colleagues. And before getting started, coming from a sustainability background, it's important to make a quick conceptual note, which is sustainability and resilience cannot be disassociated. So both are working towards one big goal, which is to develop infrastructure which is able to deliver good services for the society, for the environment. So we cannot treat sustainability apart from resilience, and resilience is a big part of the sustainability or the outcomes that is generated by sustainable infrastructure. So first I would like to speak a little bit, and I think there is a presentation, so if you can do it. But to address the question that it's in the title of the session, so how labels can structure infrastructure which is sustainable and resilient and then drive more investments.
Can we please have the slides? Sorry, the slides. Thank you.
So, next slide, please. So, from the labels perspective, we can address three big pain points related to project development and investment. The first thing is asset managers and investors, they have the demand to invest in projects. So we've been speaking the whole day about the infrastructure investment gap. We spoke about this in the morning, in the afternoon. And the good news is there is money. Marilla and Frenda also talk about it. There is money, but investors don't know where the good projects are. So there is an origination issue here that we should solve. The second topic that is a big pain point, it is the capacity building. So by the time investors can identify good projects, sometimes projects that doesn't have the technical ability or the knowledge on how to develop sustainability and resilience practices. It is, we have lots of things in the market. We spoke also about it. But they are all scattered through different regions, different dimensions. So it is important to standardize and create capacity in the project development level to develop sustainability and resilience practices, and then by doing that, providing good data for investors to create the risk profiles and decrease risk by doing that. If you're not able to do this, then transactions costs are going to rise, times are going to rise, and then it's going to be more difficult. The third point is sometimes asset managers, they all create their own frameworks and they are capable to evaluate if infrastructure assets are sustainable and resilient. But the lack of track record of the performance of those assets as a whole also is preventing them to become a liquid mainstream asset class. There are many other topics. Also, it was covered in the last panel. It's way more complicated than this, but this is one of the reasons that this is still treated as an alternative asset class. And that's also preventing more investments to be driven to this category. So Fast Infra label was created to address those pain points. So we are a global label designed to create those guidelines and measurements on what is sustainability and what is resilient infrastructure. Like we also, yeah, I keep repeating this, but it's important because it also shows consistency in the market. We are not creating something new. This is built on more than 50 existing standards and frameworks. So what we are trying to do is to gather the best practices and to deliver the market a consolidated solution to implement sustainability and resilience in infrastructure asset level. The second point, the concept important in Fast Infra label, which is this is applicable to the entire infrastructure market, different regions, different sectors, different project stages. This is important because market needs data comparison. Comparability, it's important to make decisions, so we should be able, and this is it was a big challenge to create something that could fit into different realities, different project stages. It is designed mainly to attend, the global south, but it's applicable to the entire infrastructure market. So we are the main idea behind it is to make sure that projects that are not in the biggest regions, because the developed economies can use this and having a strong guideline on how to develop those dimensions in the project. The third part is this is open, so this is a free tool. Everybody can use it, can use as a guideline, can use it as a toolkit to develop infrastructure. This is the self-assessment part. Yes, for sure, to get third-party verification, then it's a paid process because that involves different companies, respected companies in the verification market, but it's an open tool, and that's how should it be, because we need to create this capacity in the market. And the fourth element is this initiative is backed, it was conceived by the private sector, by the biggest asset managers and investors in infrastructure in the planet. So this is a project that is being led by companies such as HSBC, Macquarie, Meridian, as we heard from Marie-Hélène Frando, and also supported by different MDBs, DFIs, infrastructure developers, and the entire infrastructure ecosystem. And why this is especially important? Because we should send a strong message to the market. There is a need for that. So there is money. We need to organize our data, decrease risks, and make this possible. So this is an important message that, and it's quite interesting to have different initiatives here speaking, because it brings consistency to this message. Finally, what we are trying to achieve here is to develop more sustainable, more resilient infrastructure. Next slide, please. In a more operational way, so what is the label? The label is a set of indicators. They are practical and objective. They are measuring practices. Do you have a risk assessment in place? Are you considering different stakeholders' views in this process? Do you have biodiversity measures being implemented? And then it goes on. I will explain to you the dimensions a little bit after. So from the project developer point of view, this is a good tool to guide your project towards better practices. So when you self-report, hopefully you're going to get the self-assessed label so you can improve your risk profile and also get access to finance, to get access to people who are willing to invest in sustainable and resilient infrastructure. From the investor standpoint, we are talking about having facilitated the origination process, the ESG screening, all the due diligences and also the reporting. So it's gonna, by adopting Fast Infra label, it's gonna be all the processes are going to be facilitated. And especially for the public sector, which is, all this can be applied in terms of project and development and when financing, and it's a clear signal that, or reassuring that the projects that the public sector is developing are meeting the highest standards, and then by doing that, you're going to be capable to attract new partners. So to having this catalytic power that the public sector has and bringing more investments to your regions by using Fast Infra label. Next one, please. Resilience play an important role in our framework. So we have almost 500 indicators split through 4 big criteria. So it is the basic ESG, so environmental criteria, and then we have, environmental dimension, different criterias, social, which is an important topic here. We are all here from regions that social, it's a pretty relevant topic, so there is lots of eyes and efforts to build a strong social dimension, governance dimension, which is also pretty relevant to our countries, but also resilience. So resilience is one, resilience and adaptation is one specific dimension. It's really, really important. It's a set of 25 indicators based on TCFD, Sendai, and other frameworks. If you're going to create something interesting, you are. That's definitely something that we should also have it embedded in this criteria. So it's all a matter of gathering the good practices and making it available to project developers. We are now going forward towards our 3rd version. So in the last 6 months, we have a pretty busy moment when we were piloting projects. So we pilot projects in Asia Pacific, India, Africa, South America. And then we are able to understand a little bit more about the indicators, how they apply, and how to make it really, really valuable for project developers and for investors. We came from a 2nd public consultation, so this 3rd version of the framework is going to be launched in 2 weeks, but it is now open to applications to all projects, and we are looking forward to ramp up the adoption in the next 6 months. Next slide, please. You can jump this one. Yeah. So finally, I think it's there are 3 big enablers here, and that we should keep in mind: market transformation / capacity building. The 2nd one is standardization, and the 3rd one is to facilitate investment processes. If we are able to do these 3 things, that's for sure we can drive more investments into sustainable and resilient infrastructure. And I think we are all here, we have an important role into that. This is not only a Fast Infra, BDN, climate bond initiative. It is an initiative from all the market. We have this task. So it's up to us to create and to develop more sustainable and resilient infrastructure that are going to be capable to deliver benefits for our people, for our planet, and the time is now. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Roger. And I will ask you a very quick question in the interest of time, but I think maybe I'm not the only one wondering. We heard that you are backed by very important funds. Is there some sort of fast track for funding for projects that are labeled by Fast Infra?
Yeah. There are 2 main ways that we are making this tangible. The first way is Fast Infra label is embedded in Bloomberg technology. So Bloomberg has decades of experience of delivering data to the investment and for the market side. So by having your project self-assessed and verified if you wish to, then you're going to be appearing and you're going to be in the data that it's available for thousands of investments that are accessing Bloomberg data every day. So this is one way. This is the passive way. The active way is also we have lots of different organizations supporting fast infra. I mentioned some of them, but I have way more. And this is our task to create this kind of connection. So it's also a tangible part of our value proposition is to make sure all the projects that are looking for finance and go for self-assessment and get the self-assessed label have direct access to the investors that are part of fast infra label. And it's not a closed group, so we are always putting more people there, so you can expect your project being presented to different organizations that can support in terms of financing.
All right, extremely interesting. Thanks very much, Roger. And I think you have raised the interest of our colleagues in the audience. So still staying on the topic of fast infra, I would like to invite our fourth speaker, who is Sutanu Patti, who is based out of Bombay, who has actually worked on a project preparation, on a project which has piloted fast infra here in India. So Sutanu, we're very eager to hear about your experience trying to make it work here in India in this context. So over to you. Thanks, Sutanu.
Yeah, thank you, Agathe, and thank you, Roger. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Yeah, thanks for the slides also. So I think we're coming to the end of the session today, and being the penultimate speaker, I have the responsibility for saving some time for my former colleague, Palash. Right? So I'll be brief, and my job has been made really easy by Roger. He has already explained the fast infra framework to you. So I will just present the project that we have applied this framework to. So next slide, please. So this project has been assisted by C40 Cities Finance Facility. They help in structuring the projects and developing the projects so that they reach to the financing and implementation stage. They have already assisted more than projects valued more than $1 billion in total. Can we move to the next slide? So the client is the Brihanmumbai Electricity Supply and Transport, in short, BEST. So they have two services. One is transportation, the other is the electricity supply. In transportation, they are managing more than 300 city buses, and their ambition is to go to a fleet of 10,000 electric buses in the next few years. So they have already placed orders for more than 5,000 electric buses. So they are undoubtedly the largest e-bus operator in the country, and they are likely to remain so for some time. And in terms of electricity supply, they are managing the electricity distribution only for the island part of the city. About 1 million customers and total connected load of about 4,000 megawatt. So they're already familiar with the electricity business, but our client here was the transportation business. Next slide, please. So the project rationale is that just replacing the ICE buses with electric buses is not going to eliminate the carbon emissions. So for that, we really need to use clean energy for charging the e-buses. And Mumbai especially is heavily dependent on fossil fuels. More than 95% is sourced from coal and gaseous fuels. The bus depots have huge unused surface areas, and that could be used for generating clean energy. So this will not only reduce the emissions, but it will also save some cost in the process for BEST, and they can provide affordable public transport service. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, CFF is funding the project development phase. So in this, we did the technical feasibility, the legal and institutional feasibility, financial feasibility, as well as we looked at the equity and inclusion aspects, as well as the environment and impact assessment aspects and climate proofing needs for this project. And during this study, we also added certain additional features to this, including a rainwater harvesting component to this project, which will enhance the positive contributions from this project. We have also undertaken the structural designs for the actual solar work that will be done. This is Little new in this country, we have not yet completely solarized any of the depots, unlike I think certain depots in US or in Spain, which have been completely solarized, so including the bus parking areas. So we have completed all the studies now, and we are in the procurement phase where we will be interacting with the project developers and appointing project developer, one or more project developers who would then implement the project and without any funding required from BEST. And we have also undertaking a lot of capacity building, because that is quite crucial, because we will always not be with BEST. So from here on onwards, they need to take this project forward on their own. So we have focused on a lot on the capacity building aspects. Next, please. So you can see here, we have just shown one example. On your left, you see the Kolaba bus depot of BEST, where you can see what I was talking about being so much of open areas or unused surfaces being available within the depot. And on the right, you can see what the proposal is to utilize those areas. So not only the existing rooftops or the sheds, we are also planning to cover the entire parking area with the solar panels that will also provide shade to the buses. So when they are parked, so there would be reduction in the electricity consumption for cooling those buses as well. And it will also provide relief to the people who are working in those areas. Next slide. So overall, in the 27 depots, we have identified the potential to implement 42 megawatts. In terms of rooftop capacities, this is quite significant, because as of now, in Mumbai city, the total rooftop capacity is about of this magnitude. Over last 10 to 15 years, that's been achieved. So in single project, we will be able to double the rooftop capacity of the city. And in terms of AC capacity, it will be 35 megawatts. It will generate about 60 million units of clean energy every year. It will reduce the cost of the electricity between 10 to 15 rupees or 12 to 19 US cents for BEST or the bus operator. Total cost needed is around 40, a little less than 40 US million. And annually, it will generate savings of around 8 million US. So therefore, there will be a payback period of less than 5 years. So this is not only environmentally sustainable, it's also financially rewarding for the client. Next, please. In terms of the positive contribution, like I mentioned, the project will generate more than 60 million units of clean energy. It will also generate employment equivalent to 1,000 jobs. There will be no additional water usage. And not only that, the amount of water used by the buses, we will be charging 10 times of that much water into the ground every year through the water harvesting project. Next slide, please. In terms of the project implementation structure, this is also a little unique. Unlike other parts of the country, in Maharashtra, for solar rooftop, third-party ownership is not allowed. So leasing is allowed. So we will be using a leasing structure where we will be having the e-bus operator, which is the primary consumer of the electricity, as the primary lessee. And the financial benefits will be shared between BEST and the lessee. And we will have a solar company implementing the project on a lease basis, on a long-term lease basis. So there will not be any outgo from either the bus operating company or BEST. All the financial investment will be done by this solar company, and they will get paid over a long period of maybe 15 to 20 years. And there will be financial savings as well as environment savings from day one. Next slide, please. So our motivation for going for the fast infra is, there are different standards for environmental sustainability in different countries, as well as in different parts of our own country. We have 30 states and each have their own rules and regulations. The level of compliance is also quite different. So to convince international investors to invest in this project, it would have been very difficult. But with the help of Fast Infra, we have been able to standardize these processes, and also we will be able to easily convince the international investors that we are following the sustainability principles, specifically the IFC performance standards on environmental and social sustainability. And we were also able to advise the client as to what are the requirements if they were looking to get some international green funds into this project. So that was basically our motivation for going for the fast infra level, although we knew this was in the initial phases, but we were happy to help out fast infra in testing out their leveling practice using our project. Next slide, please. So in terms of the process for the self-leveling, it was quite simple, which is the stage we are at right now. We haven't gone for the external audit as of now because the project is still under development. So we started the process of self-leveling in the first week of October, and by the third week of November, we were all done with the leveling process. And the project itself the first level was inaugurated and the project was presented at COP28 in the first week of December. So the whole process was quite smooth, unexpectedly. I mean, we were hoping that, being the initial phase, there will be complications, but we were greatly facilitated by the Fast Infra team and it was done very smoothly. Next slide. So in terms of the resources required, basically we needed our environmental expert and the equity and inclusion expert to go through all the requirements of the leveling and provide all the clarifications and the information to the Fast Infra team. And as I mentioned, the process was quite smooth. The resource requirement was not too much. The client was not too much inconvenience in terms of the data or information requirements. So it was quite good. Next slide, please. So that's about it. And last but not the least, very honored to be able to present our project in this forum, and happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, Sutanu, and we really appreciate this message that labeling is not only feasible, but also rather fast, and also detailing the timeline and the human resources required is very helpful for those in the audience who are thinking about going through the labeling process. So thanks very much for sharing this with you. In the interest of time, I'm going to directly turn towards our last speaker, who is Palash Srivastava, who has been involved in a number of initiatives around labeling, especially around establishing infrastructure standards as well as rolling them out in the context of India. And so as our last speaker, Palash, we are very interested in understanding from your experience what kind of barriers, what kind of opportunities are there in a country like India for initiatives like this? How realistic is it to roll out, and how likely is it to direct investment? So thanks very much for your intervention.
Thank you for having me here, and it is actually quite satisfying. As I recall, as I sailed out on a Lufthansa plane to contribute to a design workshop of SURE standards, which are the precursors of the fast infra label. And from then to now, I think it's been a very long journey and very accomplished one. We had set out to contribute to creating a label, largely because the financing, and I wear a number of hats. So I would like to really narrate it from those standpoints. So we needed a label at that time, and we said that, no, we are a committed institution. I was in IDFC at that time, and we said that we wanted to contribute to the development of a label like this. And of course, whatever the negotiations were on what will be the environment parameters, what would be the social parameters, what would be the governance parameters, and of course, then the benefits approach came in, and because the impact of large infrastructure projects also needed to be taken account of. So all the evolution was taking care of a lot of stakeholders' point of views, and that actually enabled the acceptance or adoption of these standards I would say, and the design also provided for regional adaptation. So there was regional adaptation in China, in India, and of course, the South Africa, Brazil. And so where I would like to really now kind of bring my own institution is that, we work as financial institution, we finance infrastructure projects. That is what IFCL actually does as the premier lending institution in the infrastructure space. We are now guided by the central bank having a climate risk assessment framework. Now, there is a need for, obviously, the taxonomy or the labels actually help do that in terms of, even good projects, good corporates are known, or good issuances are known by their ratings. So similarly, we felt that, any label should enable a certain amount of, financing to come through, right? Because it is very important for any label to be successful, to be able to at least draw some funds, or even if it is not able to reduce the cost of funding available, at least should make available longer term loans at certain, concessional terms. So this actually has happened, but not really the way it could have happened. And that is something which I would like to really kind of speak about from a financing standpoint. I also actually wear the hat of an advisor, so that enables me to actually step into the shoes of the government. And government is the seller of infrastructure projects. So as a seller of infrastructure projects, it is, and to be a responsible seller, it can actually introduce certain conditions which allow infrastructure projects to be, more sustainable and resilient. Now, for doing that, in fact, we have as an institution taken forward the agenda and tried to include in the bidding documents, both in the design stage of the, projects have their life cycle, and in the design stage, from the design stage itself, there are certain specifications which are to be included. And then not only the specifications, but from a process standpoint as well, and certain credential standpoint also, we have created in their procurement documents certain sustainability parameters. Now, the experience that we have had of applying, of course, this is fast infra that was spoken of, but there is a Trans Stadia, stadium in Gujarat, which is one of the leading states of India, and also to a ropeway project. So the leading state, which is more economically oriented, prides itself as an economic powerhouse. And on the other side, we have Meghalaya, the defining feature of the blue dot that we are on, as the rainiest place on the globe. Now, they pride themselves in being, the more sustainable kinds. They would like to pursue development in a sustainable way. So both these experiences that we've been able to kind of build on as far as applying these labels in these contexts have also enabled us to understand these different standpoints. So if I stand in the shoes of, say, the government in Gujarat, and I say that, this is something which is actually required, they'd be very clear that, if it is giving me some interest subvention somewhere, or it is actually extending the terms of, lending in some ways, I would be very, very keen. Though finally the developer who actually, and I'm now, going to also narrate about how the developer felt. The developer felt that, the process was fine. I did not really have to, I had expected a lot of headache in, the engagement, but the engagement was very, smooth, and the facilitation was well provided for. However, he said that, I feel proud at having an asset which has a sure gold certification, but that really would have actually meant a little more if I was able to translate it into some monetary benefits. Now, that is one side of it. And of course, on the Meghalaya side of it, it was a lot of capacity building, a lot of appreciation that, there is this perspective also which is actually there. And the fact that they could not have committed themselves to a certain practice because they did not really know about comprehensively about those practices actually gave them a silver, but they actually by having a silver actually were motivated to actually become better in their planning process, and they so that project is also under execution. So I'm actually giving you the granularity just to kind of nuance out when we talk about labels, it is not just policy. Policy will, of course, as was mentioned, that there will be a definition and there will be a commonly accepted, and obviously because now global investment flows are globally done, so there has to be a common denominator that everybody has to really understand, and it will be much better to do it that way. But we need to have a platform where the transaction on data with respect to sustainability, resilience can be freely exchanged. And that is where I think it is important for us to really, collaborate, contribute. And I can actually go on quite a bit on this, but I think mindful of time, I don't really want to, I'm passionate about it and I really feel quite.
Thanks very much, Palash. And so I think we heard your recommendations. I think, Juan, Neha, Roger, to make sure that there is maximum uptake of your products, we need to make sure that it comes with improved access to concessional and long-term finance. And also for CDRI, we heard the message about capacity building, making sure that there are some tools, and not just from CDRI, because we know that also our colleagues are thinking very actively about capacity building to make sure that there is the potential to implement these labels. So we have a very nice screen that is telling us that time is up. So unfortunately, because time is up, we are not going to take questions. However, we will be staying for a few minutes. So if you want to engage with our panelists, and I hope that we'll have very good conversations around the uptake of these labels in your respective countries. So thanks very much. And I will hand over to my colleague Aishwarya to bring this session to a close. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Agar. To commemorate this insightful session, I would now request you to present the certificates. Now we'll